audience. I figured it out. All right, let's try this one more time. Welcome into the Schaumburg Library, everybody. My name is Chris. I'm your adult programs coordinator here at the library. So sorry, online audience. It's the easiest fix. I didn't turn on one thing, as one does. But welcome in. I'm so excited to be continuing our Civic Awareness series. We only have 2 sessions left in 2025 after this one, and I know the league will share about those. They're both really good sessions when we get to the end. But tonight is about obviously news media, trust and truth. But before we talk about that fun stuff, the most important stuff, where are the bathrooms? If this is your first time to the Rasmussen room, you'll find our bathrooms located straight out this exit door. Ladies is immediately on the left. Gentlemen's is just a little bit further down the wall, and there is a water fountain in between if you need some. If you have to step out of the program at any point this evening, all 3 doors to the Rasmussen room are unlocked on both sides, and you can use either to come in or out as you wish. I'd also like to ask at this time that our in-person audience silence all cell phones and any other electronic device that may make noise during the program, as lights and sounds emitted by those devices are distracting to your fellow patrons, as well as the speaker. Big gulp of air. And for our in-person audience, if you have questions for the speaker, we are going to take all questions at the end of the, I'm giving up on this. I muted it. I'm loud. We will take all questions at the end of the program. There's a lot of you, and if we took them as we went, we would have to stop. One of us would run up to you with our little clip-on mics. We'd have to hold it at your mouth. But instead, you have these wonderful little post-it pieces of paper and probably a pen in front of you. If you don't, just throw your hand high in the air, and one of our league friends will get you something so you can write down any questions you might have for the speaker. We'll take all questions at the end of the program. And they will all be fielded by the League of Women Voters. That way we can see is there a burning topic that's going through the entire audience's mind. If you're at home, don't worry just because we can't drive to you and get your questions. That's what Zoom is for. And I know you know how to use it. I watched you use the chat and the Q&A a moment ago. You're going to use the chat and the Q&A to submit any questions and submit those as you feel free, as you want. Feel free to submit them as you want as we go. And we'll take all those questions. The league is going to have my tablet, so they'll be able to see those popping in live at the end as well. And also for our at-home audience, you'll notice that closed captions have been enabled for your convenience, and you can turn those on or off as you wish. This took me a lot longer than normal because we had to take to this. So I am going to get out of the way and turn things over to Katie Allen from the League of Women Voters.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. And good evening, and thank you to all of you for joining the League of Women Voters of the Palatine, Barrington, and Schaumburg areas and the Schaumburg Township District Library for another civic awareness discussion. Whether you're here at the library or joining us remotely, we're glad you're with us tonight. My name is Katie Allen, and I'm a new member and recently joined the group who puts on these civic awareness series. The League of Women Voters of the Palatine, Barrington, and Schaumburg areas is a political, nonpartisan organization whose mission is to increase voter engagement and defend democracy. We welcome the energy of all ages and genders to join us in supporting voter education and to advocate on issues of concern to our community. If you're interested in learning more about the League, you can stop by the membership table in the back, or for those joining online, our website is available in the chat. Tonight's session, Navigating Media and Finding Reliable Sources, is as timely as ever, and we are so pleased to have Jim Slusher, Managing Editor for the Opinion Page at the Daily Herald, with us tonight. Jim is an award-winning newspaper writer and editor with more than 47 years' experience throughout the Midwest and California. As managing editor for opinion at the Daily Herald, he oversees the development of the editorial page and helps define the editorial voice at the 3rd largest daily newspaper in Illinois, serving the west and northwest suburbs of Chicago. Jim works closely with other newsroom managers to establish and monitor policies of the news operation, and he writes a weekly column to give readers insights into the decision-making processes of the Daily Herald newsroom. In his most recent book, To Nudge the World, Conversation, Community, and the Role of the Local Newspaper, a topics-driven selection of works from his 25 years as a Daily Herald local media columnist, was published in 2024. Jim, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Katie. Can everyone hear me okay? Chris, can they hear me okay on the online? Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here. I want to emphasize, or tell you a little bit about me. Katie already gave you pretty much a good overview of who I am and what I've done in journalism. I've been in just about every role you can be in. I've even written sports stories. I've written opinion for many years at the Daily Herald. I've written straight news stories. So I'm very familiar with the business. I'm very familiar with where we stand right now, at kind of a pivotal point for our industry. Last year, we realized that I had been writing my column about newspapers and about media for 25 years. So Eckhart's Press was interested in publishing and published my book. And I would emphasize that there's much more in the book than I will talk about tonight. I'm just going to talk about trust. The columns range from every aspect of media, from whether it's why we review movies to how you can be worried about your kid when he's in London sometime. And so it's a kind of a different experience. And if you're interested, that'll be available, and I'll be happy to sign it afterwards. But for tonight, I really would like to talk about what I think is one of the most important and difficult subjects in media today. It has always been an issue, as we'll see in a few minutes. But I really think that there are two things that I hope that you come away with as we get into this. Well, we'll talk about free speech and free press. I want to talk and promote self-examination, because that's really one of the first points that I really want to make. Is we say that trust is earned, and trust is earned. People earn your trust, or you earn people's trust by showing them that you deserve it. But trust is also given. And what we'll find very often is that, especially today, people are giving their trust. Not necessarily whether it's earned or not. They tend to give it to agencies, people that they feel in some connection with. And so one of the things that we have to learn for each of us, I think, is, am I trusting because someone has earned my trust, or am I trusting because I like the way that person looks, or I like the way that person talks, or I like the same things that person likes? And I think if we start challenging ourselves in that way, we can actually build our trust and build a world or a situation in which we can be more confident in the things that we give trust to. And so we'll talk about that, and part of that issue for me is emphasizing the difference between skepticism and cynicism. I've had some recent arguments with people who say they mean the same thing, and if you look up the definitions in the dictionary, they are very similar. But I think there's a very important difference between the two. A cynic is someone who doesn't believe anything, doesn't believe anybody. Everybody's out to get me, everybody's got bad motives, or anyone that I don't trust has bad motives, and is very cynical and is immediately likely to distrust whatever source it might be, whether it's news media or anything else. A skeptic, however, knows that there's a potential for something to be amiss, but doesn't necessarily say, I'm sure that someone's out to get me. I'm going to find out a little bit more for myself. And that's where I think it's really important for us as consumers of news media, as consumers of anything, to examine how we trust things. I think the great phrasing generally in this mode is Ronald Reagan's statement that we should trust but verify. That's a skeptic. Trust but verify. You'll find that there are some things that you can never trust. You'll find there are some things that you can mostly trust. But almost nothing is trustworthy all the time. You might be inclined to think, well, Jim Slusher is coming from the Daily Herald. He's been there for 27 or 35 years now, 35 years. He's going to tell us that we can trust the Daily Herald. I'm not going to tell you that. I'm not going to tell you that you can distrust the Daily Herald. I'm going to tell you that we work very hard to make the reporting that we provide worthy of your trust. But there's much in the paper every day that skirts the edge, and that should raise questions in you that makes you think, oh, maybe I better double check that, and maybe I better double check to get some more answers on that. A little aside along those lines that actually came up today for something that we have in tomorrow's paper. We're running a column in tomorrow's paper by a columnist who is making the case to remove Jerome Powell as Fed chairman. And in it, he makes a statement that Jerome Powell gave a speech in which he said that economic growth for this year is only 1.6%. And he says that's absolutely untrue. It's actually 3.3%. So I was editing this column today, and I thought, well, how can that be? There must be something wrong there. The Fed chairman must know what the economic growth pattern is. So I looked it up, and indeed, the 1.6% number is wrong. I didn't have a lot of chance to go back and find out why Jerome Powell made that statement incorrectly, but I'm going to, and I will encourage you to look it up, because it's an important part of this writer's point of view is that Jerome Powell doesn't know what he's talking about, and he's trying to mislead the public about economic growth in America. And those are the kinds of things, and we'll see some other examples of that as we go through, that I think we need to do to question, to be skeptical, to be trusting, but be willing to verify those things that just don't quite sound right. Some background. Quickly, I'm not going to go through all of this, but I just want to show a little chart here that shows over time since Eisenhower, when there was a huge trust, 75% of people expressed a lot of trust in news media, whether it was broadcast or newsprint, and that has declined over the years. The years go up, and as you go through each president, it got very low as at the bottom of the Nixon years, came back a little bit with Reagan, and then went back down a little bit up with Bush. You see it going back and forth a little. Now, one of the things that the Gallup and Pew people have found is that political party makes a big difference in who you trust. That, to me, doesn't make a lot of sense if we really want to trust somebody. It shouldn't make a difference to us whether they're Republican or Democrat, but it shows up in the figures that if there's a Republican president, you're more inclined to trust the government if you're a Republican. If there's a Democratic president, you're more inclined to trust the government if you're a Democrat. And you're more inclined to distrust the party that is other than yours. And I think if that's the case, that should make us challenge ourselves. Am I trusting him because I'm a Democrat and he's a Democrat? Am I trusting her or am I distrusting her because she's a Republican and I'm a Democrat? If that's the case, I'm not really using my full brain in deciding how much to trust. Some more research that kind of goes along these same lines. This was research that focuses on people depending on how trusting they are. How much are they willing to trust other people? And it shows that people who are trusting tend to trust scientists a lot, the military a lot. Journalists have never been particularly well trusted. Elected officials even less than others. And you'll see that based on income level, age level, all of these different things, all of those are factors in what lead people to trust what they trust. Again, for me, I think I should trust based on not my age, but on the facts and figures and information that I get. And yet, I have to realize that, maybe there are some things that I do just because of my age, and maybe I better check that. Another Gallup poll was done with the Knight, in conjunction with the Knight Foundation in 2020, just before the pandemic hit, and it came up with a lot of other information that kind of goes along these same lines. That trust has hit an all-time low. You can see as you go through, we have we've rarely had as low numbers as we have now in terms of how well people trust the media. And that includes even the media that they do trust. And you can see, if you go through this, I won't go through every one of them, but I encourage you to take a look at what their main points are about how Americans see bias and how concerned people are about bias in the news media today. What is bias? There are a number of factors that play into our bias and what we think of bias. When I started, I said, I don't want you to simply trust the Daily Herald. I want you to be willing to go to other sources. I think it's extremely important that we realize that all sources are produced by human beings. All human beings have biases of all types. And we all may have the best interests of our readership at heart, our viewership at heart, but how we react to that is going to be different depending on each one of us. And we see this is true in so many other things. There are research showing how we trust what we trust and what people will determine. They ask, okay, what makes you trust what you trust? Is it the sources that the story cites? And about 51% say that, you know, that's true. But generally they try to rely on the sources. If they trust the source, they'll trust the information. The news organization, they tend to lean towards one news organization or another. One of the things that really strikes me is that 26% of people just trust whoever told it to me. And they're more inclined to trust the next door neighbor or somebody that they know than they are even maybe a news source that does research and has reported extensively on a subject. And then some history. People today like to say, and I often hear people say, oh, we need the good old days of Walter Cronkite and back to when newspapers and news media could be trusted, and you knew who their sources were. And I point out there was never such a good old day. If you go all the way back to the founding, the founding fathers and their establishment of the whole concept of free press and free speech, the news media at that time was as Wild West as anything online today. The huge difference was only a certain number of people could use free press because only a certain number of them were able to afford a free press. But those who afforded it said whatever they wanted and they wrote whatever they wanted, and if you read it, you better be careful about what you decided to trust or believe, because it was really only that person's and his staff's point of view that you got, very much like online media today. And one of the classic examples of this was James Callender. I don't know if any of you know who James Callender was. He was a printer, a pressman in the late 18th century. And when John Adams was president, he was an adamant opponent of John Adams. And John Adams pushed through an act forbidding treason or saying things against the government. And James Callender was arrested and thrown in jail as a quote-unquote traitor because he had said bad things about the government that could not be proved. Or even if they could, he wasn't allowed to do something that might be considered seditious. So he was thrown in jail. And then Thomas Jefferson came into office. And Thomas Jefferson was a compatriot of Callender's. Callender was a supporter of Thomas Jefferson's. Jefferson didn't like the Sedition Act. It got repealed. And see if this sounds familiar. All of the hundreds of people who had been arrested as traitors, he pardoned and let them out. James Callender was among them. James Callender wanted to be Postmaster General for Richmond, Virginia. And he thought that as a strong supporter of Jefferson, he deserved to have that position. Jefferson wasn't so keen on him and decided to give the job to someone else. And so Callender got angry. And in his anger, he had heard this rumor that Thomas Jefferson had a concubine among his slaves. And so he printed this story that you see here. It is well known that the man whom it delighteth the people to honor keeps and for many years has kept his concubine, one of his slaves. Her name is Sally. He talks about who she is, her son, her family, and gives a bunch of information about her. I emphasize this story would never be published in the Daily Herald today. There's no source. There's no explanation of how this person knows that other than there are people, his features are said to bear a striking resemblance to Thomas Jefferson. So he makes all of these claims without a shred of real evidence or justification for why we should trust him. But many people did trust him, and they trusted him for many years. Turns out he was right. Now, I don't know exactly what to say about that. He just happened to be lucky, if you ask me. But we would never have published a story this flimsy with so little evidence in this way. But it was done in the early part of the century, early part of our country's history, when people think that free press was so much more wonderful than it is today. Let's look at some ways to examine bias and to help us find out where bias stands. This is an interactive chart, mediabiaschart.com. You can go to their website and you will see it's actually interactive. You see here just a flat view of it. And it shows a whole range of news sources. Some of them are podcasts, some are online websites, some are traditional broadcast agencies, some are traditional newspapers. And the staff of this organization goes through each one of these, applies a variety of criteria to them, and has tried to determine which ones are trustworthy and which ones are not, and to what degree are they trustworthy and to what degree not. And it shows that the chart going up, how much the reporting at that agency is based on fact and actual reporting and good source work. And then to the left and the right, it shows whether that agency tends to be more conservative or more liberal. So you see kind of right in the middle, one of the middle ones is the CBS Evening News is one of those that's most in the middle, that is most in the middle. It said, okay, they do their fact checking, they do their homework, and they try not to be either conservative or liberal. Over here we have Fox News that they found tends to be a little bit more conservative, but it's pretty reliable. The information that they offer is pretty reliable, but it just tends to be done from a conservative point of view. And maybe they don't include other information that they don't want you to know. And they say the opposite about MSNBC, which is over here on the left, which also tends to be pretty reliable in the information it produces, but doesn't necessarily give you the whole picture. And well, I would encourage you to look at this because it's just interesting to see. But also, whenever you come across a news source, it can help you to decide to some degree, how much can I trust this agency? Then another place that you can go It's called allsides.com. Now, as you look at this, you might think, well, geez, I'm going to have to go through all this work to read a newspaper? I just want to read the newspaper. And so I'm not going to say that you should go to allsides.com every day or that you should go to Media Bias Chart every day. But I am going to say that when you hear something that sounds a little bit off, these are some places that you can go that might help you determine how much you can trust or where you can look at it. What I like about this site in particular is that it gives you a look at the same story as it was told from 3 different points of view. So on this particular day, the troops to Los Angeles was a very big part of the news, and so they looked at how different sources approached that story. From the left, you see a headline that says, Trump's Washington police take over history of racist narratives about urban crime. From the right, you hear the Dems are really going there regarding Trump's takeover of D.C. And in the middle, yes, D.C. has a crime problem, but it's different than Trump thinks. So, that's also somewhat from the right. Another story, very similarly, showed Trump extends China deadline by 90 days. Pretty straightforward from the left, but doesn't really go into some of the issues related. From the right, Trump will extend the China tariff pause, says Beijing has been dealing quite nicely. So it's a little bit more friendly headline. And then from the center, the U.S.-China extend the tariff truce by 90 days, staving off surge in duties, so it's a little bit more informational. Of course, those headlines are summations of what they found in agencies of these 3 different points of view. But it can help you really get a sense of the different ways that you can look at, that different people can look at the same story and the same set of figures and facts. I also like to point out that for those of us who want to be responsible journalists, we do make a strong effort to be worthy of your trust. And there are 2 particular agencies, in addition to a number of industry groups that we all ascribe to. But 2 sites that are really worth pointing out are Trusting News for Journalists, which has a set of guidelines that they suggest that we abide by if we really want people to be able to trust us. And then a more recent one called the Center for Integrity in News Reporting, which also says that newspapers and broadcasters should tell their readers what their points of view are, or what their, make a commitment to giving unbiased, impartial information as best they can. And this agency actually gives awards to newspapers and broadcast services that show the best abilities to do those things. And now some things about questioning truth and things that we need to go into ourselves. This is an editorial cartoon that came across my desk, my computer, at a time when Elon Musk was very active in Doge and had made a statement about empathy. And this editorial cartoonist, if you'll see, he took off from this statement. He starts with Einstein's description of empathy is very wonderful. Empathy is patiently and sincerely seeing the world through the other person's eyes. This person, the philosopher Hannah Arendt, said, the death of human empathy is one of the early and most telling signs that a culture is about to fall into barbarism. Another emphasis of why empathy is so important. Captain Gilbert, a psychologist who was involved with the Nuremberg trials, said it is one characteristic that connects all the defendants, all these Nazis, a genuine incapacity to feel with their fellow men. Evil, I think, is the lack of empathy. So you have all these 3 very positive statements about empathy, and then Elon Musk says the fundamental weakness of Western civilization is empathy. kind of funny. I had to laugh. I'm not a huge Elon Musk fan, and so I can understand why I might laugh. But I also didn't run the cartoon because I have. I just couldn't believe that someone would be so cold about empathy and say, hey, we shouldn't care about our fellow man. And so I looked it up a little bit more. I looked into it, and it turns out he said this in an interview with Joe Rogan. Again, not one of the most reliable persons in my point of view, but it still was an interview between two people. They're talking about empathy. And he does say the fundamental weakness of Western civilization is empathy. But he says it in the context that he's saying, you know, we care so much about other people that we sometimes overlook what we should be doing with our government. Now, I don't know that I agree. If you read through this whole conversation, I wouldn't say necessarily that I personally agree with it, but I would say that it is much different than suggesting that a person has no heart and that a person thinks that people should not have a heart, which is not what Musk was saying. He was saying that we tend sometimes to let our empathy overtake our intellect in accepting what we accept from the government. And so I felt that the cartoon then was fundamentally dishonest, and I didn't publish it for that reason. Here's a similar cartoon, and I'm not sure, the more I talk about this one, I sometimes question my own logic in it, but I felt differently about this one, and I did publish it. It says, the President Trump, if somebody from the White House, you want to abolish the education department? And the answer is yes. I love the poorly educated. Well, Trump did say that. And yet, I accepted this one somewhat differently because I felt that while he did say it, it's clear enough from the cartoon, it doesn't make him sound evil necessarily, but it's clear enough that people from both sides can argue what he meant by it and what he's really doing. You know, if you really look at what he's saying in reality, he doesn't trust the education department. He thinks it's not doing a good job. And so he's not saying, I want people to be poorly educated, I want them to be well educated. And he thinks that getting rid of the education department is the way to do that. Is he right or wrong? I'm not going to say, but I think that that's a debate that reasonable people can have and can have in a reasonable way. And this is kind of a funny way to create that discussion. And then finally, one of this has some similar issues with it. This deals with when Texas was redistricting and was changing its redistricting to try to pick up some more Democratic seats in the midterms. And this is a conservative cartoonist who wanted to say, you know, Democrats are all trying to stop gerrymandering because they don't want it because that's ours. Only we can do that. This actually would be a more persuasive cartoon to me if it was in Illinois, because in fact, you could argue that Democrats have been gerrymandering in Illinois for at least 20 years, probably 30, and in that sense, you could say, yeah, see, they don't want anybody else to do it, but they'll do it themselves. But again, I think it was acceptable as a cartoon because it can create a conversation in which we ask ourselves, well, is this really what's going on? No, this is not what's going on. Democrats are opposing redistricting in Texas, but they weren't trying to stop it just there. They're complaining because there are more Republican states that redistrict than that gerrymander than there are Democratic states. And so in that sense, there's some fundamental problems with this cartoon as well. I did run it because I thought, for one thing, we need to run some conservative cartoons from time to time. We want to make sure that we have a lot of different points of view expressed in the paper, but also because I thought that it raises some of these questions and it, again, could lead to some discussions around the kitchen table as to what's really going on with gerrymandering. Now I'd like to talk about what is a lie. One thing that has concerned me for several years has been the way we throw the word lie around, and it has been thrown around so much lately that now you just don't know whether somebody's just wrong. And does that make them a liar because they have bad information or they have incorrect information? Or are they really trying to mislead you on purpose, which is more to me what a definition of a lie is. And let's take a look at some examples. I got a letter to the editor from someone who said, he talked about Keith Peterson, who is a occasional guest commentator for us. In his op-ed in today's Daily Herald, Keith Peterson wrote that U.S. aid was created by an act of Congress in 1961. This is an outright lie. That's my boldface. In fact, the U.S. Agency for International Development was established by President John F. Kennedy by executive order on November 3rd, 1961. Look it up. Okay, so I did look it up because I was worried. Keith Peterson, I know him very well. He was a former diplomat for 30 years. He knows these facts, and he wouldn't deliberately express one incorrectly. I thought, well, maybe he was just wrong. But I looked it up, and in fact, it was created through an executive order, but there's more to it than that. And here's a person who went to the internet, found some information, relied on the first thing he found, but the fact is that Congress passed the act in 1961, and then in order to make it possible to do many of the things that the act required, President Kennedy signed that act, and he created a executive order that helped get it all started. And way much more to it than what that person said. And I'm not so concerned about being wrong, or even the writer being wrong, as I am his insistence that a person who made this expression was lying. Even if Keith Peterson had been wrong, he wasn't wrong because he was trying to mislead anyone. He would have been wrong because he just happened to make a mistake. We all make mistakes. Turns out he didn't make a mistake. He had his facts correct. But this, to me, that's cynicism. This is a person who's not going to trust you, and aha, you're lying. Here's another way that you were trying to lie and fool me. Here's another letter. Why are you not reporting the story of a Louisiana man who created 34 different names, addresses, and social security numbers and collected $1.2 billion, $2 million in social security a year? Well, because that did not happen. We went to 2 different sources, and you can find about 10 sources that deal with this rumor. That's not exactly what happened. There were facts that were somewhat related to that. There was a man who, for many years, used his brother's name and social security number, his dead brother's social security number, to get money that he wasn't supposed to get. His lawyer says that he was misunderstood and he made a mistake, but it was definitely not the horrible, evil description that person had passed around. But that person had heard just the basics of that online and then assumed that we were not telling the story, because goodness knows we would write that story if we knew it and believed that it was true. We would publish it. But she was so sure that she'd seen it online, it must be true, that we were no longer trustworthy. We didn't publish that letter. We also didn't publish the previous letter about Keith Peterson, again, because the writers were just basically wrong. And then one more local example. You may remember a shooting that occurred in Aurora a few months ago. And we got a letter from someone saying that the Daily Herald had deceitful and misleading sentences. First, the headline was misleading. It said the shooting took place after a chase. While factually correct, that was misleading and dishonest because the incident originated with a chase where an officer was severely injured and culminated when the perpetrator pointed a gun at the arresting officers. Then and only then did they shoot him. And then secondly, the story said the driver showed a gun. The driver pointed a gun at the officers and they fired him in fear of their lives, this person writes. And the author changed the entire narrative by her choice of words. Well, there's an important issue here that I'd like you to think about as you read stories of this nature. One is this person is reacting to the first day reporting of this story, and in that beginning, we know very little. All we know is what we get from the police. And so it's really hard for us to twist a story like that to make a change that will change someone's point of view or make them think badly of the police or whatever. So we didn't give a lot of details because we didn't have a lot of details. We gave only what we knew. And secondly, a headline, you have at best 8 to 10 words. You can't add that the incident originated with a chase in where an officer was severely injured and culminated when he pointed a gun at them. And then thirdly, it says the driver showed a gun, and you'll see in a moment what that looked like. So our headline said Aurora police kill man after chase, and then the story said authorities say that as officers approached the car, the driver showed a gun. This is where I want that reader or others like that person to think about how they read the news or consider the news. We didn't say that. And, this person said that they only shot him then and only then did they shoot him, as though that person was there and saw it and knew what was going on. We weren't there. We didn't see what happened. We didn't know. We had to rely on authorities. And so we tell you, the reader, this is how they told us it happened. There may be more later. We may find out more. And in fact, we did. Later reporting did find out a lot more. And it did find out, as you see the arrow there, pointing at the man as he comes out of the car, showing a gun, which is what the story says. He showed a gun. It doesn't say he pointed at officers like this person said with some feeling of authority, but you just see the gun there. So it's very easy when you have your own narrative, you believe that the media is lying to you, it's very easy for you to say, hey, they want to show they always want to show the police in a bad light, and so they're misleading me by the way that they report about that. And here's a case of one of many that kind of shows there's more to it usually than that, and I would encourage you to always look to see what more there is to it. A list for you here, and on the handout that you have, a number of different ways that you can check facts. I always encourage and emphasize that whenever you hear something that sounds, holy cow, that's outrageous, even if it's something that you believe, if it's something that supports your point of view, if it sounds outrageous, it probably is. And there's probably more to it than that. And I think if you look into it a little bit more deeply and find some of that context, you'll find that often it's not quite as partisan as the impression you may be given. Our time is running short, so I'm not going to go into a lot of AI. I will emphasize that artificial intelligence, a name which I really love because I think intelligence, if it's artificial, that's a little scary. I want my intelligence to be real. But artificial intelligence is with us. It's going to be a really important part of my kids' lives and of our children's lives. It's going to be probably a foundation. My wife and I just went on a trip and we came back, and facial recognition was how we got through in and out of the airport. They know everybody in the world by their face. It's just amazing. I've done a lot of looking at stories and asking ChatGPT to write a story in the tone of one person or another, and it can give it to you in a matter of seconds and can give you a lot of very interesting, deep facts that are really valuable and useful for you. But it also makes a lot of mistakes and probably will continue to make a lot of mistakes. There have been broadcast agencies that have tried to use AI to let people talk to Kamala Harris while she was running for president by using their database of 30 years of reporting on her to answer questions. You could ask a question of this avatar of Kamala Harris, and it would give you an answer in her voice and the tone of voice of hers based on facts that they had gathered and that had been part of the reporting record. And that's can be a really useful thing, but it can also be a little bit scary, and mistakes can be made that we have to be aware of. All of these leading to issues that emphasize to me how important it is for us to recognize why we trust what we trust, and whether it has earned our trust or not, or whether we trust it because we like the source, not necessarily because we respect what they've given or what they've done, or that we believe that they've done everything for us. Typically, I often, in my book, there's a particular column that's called Trust, Lies, and everything in between. And in it, I kind of close with what I'd like to say here, which is, you know, you go back to the early days of our history. There was a time when Charles Pinckney, who was a young hothead revolutionary, part of the Constitutional Convention, he wanted to be known as the youngest person who was at the Constitutional Convention. He wanted to go down in history as that person. Unfortunately, he wasn't the youngest person there. So he took 5 years off of his age and said he was 5 years younger than he really was to get himself under there. So probably since that time and beyond, we've always had people who are willing and able to kind of fudge the facts a little bit, and they're willing to fudge the facts. Our time is not better or worse today than it was in all those times. We're all people, we're all human beings, we make mistakes. We can be trusted sometimes we can't. I think very often I really get discouraged when I see how this word lies gets thrown around, and or even worse, and in our partisan arguments we say, well, he's a worse liar than I am. I didn't lie about that. Or I didn't, you know, he tells lies better than I do. And I think when we get that cynical, we get to a point where, boy, we just can't trust anybody. And if we can't trust anybody, we will gravitate based on our own feelings towards something that we say, well, I trust this person. And that becomes the only thing you trust. And when there's only one thing that you trust, then suddenly we're in real danger, because we all have to be, have some skepticism, have some willingness to look a little deeper. And with that, I'll close and open things up to questions.
Awesome, thank you, Jim. If you guys have questions in the room, make sure you should have been able to get them to write it down. Just pull that slide, and our lead friends are going to come around, and then I'm also going to get my lead friends back. Yep.
Okay, the first question is, how do you feel about the trust factor of the NPR?
Of NPR?
Yes.
My personal feeling?
Yeah.
My personal feeling is NPR is one of the most reliable news media that I've ever known. I've listened to them a lot. Often start my morning listening to. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. I listen to them a lot. I think they make an effort. I don't know where they are on that chart of the media bias chart before. This one? Can you?
Keep going.
Is this any better? Oh, okay. I'll speak loud. Bottom line is, I think NPR is extremely reliable. I think they may tend a little bit towards liberality, but I also have, and this is. Oops.
Can you pull that one?
Is that any better? No.
No, just everything's awful.
Okay. I'll speak as loud as I
That one
can.
we need you to keep on.
Okay. I'll speak as loud as I can. And this reflects my own personal bias to some extent, but I tend to think that extremely conservative people think anybody to the middle is far left. And so we tend to ignore sometimes efforts that other people make to be impartial, to report impartially, and I think that can be confusing. I think it's probably true also that people that are very liberal feel that anybody to the middle is conservative and right. And we get letters from both sides, people calling us conservative and people calling us liberal, and my observation is that those tend to be folks who simply think anybody who's more liberal than me is a communist, and anybody who's more conservative than me is a Nazi. And I think that's where the cynicism comes in that we have to be careful about.
Okay, the second question I have from Zoom is, do you have a list of scientists that you call in to verify facts? If so, how do you select them? If not, would it be useful?
It could be useful in certain circumstances. As a practical matter, it's not something that we have the resources to do. We rely on Associated Press, Reuters, and various national news agencies to provide the national news. And so we have to rely on them and the reporting that they do, counting on them to actually use real scientists, which they do. And so we don't have the ability really to question an actual scientist, although occasionally we do, depending on the story. And I will say that when we write stories of our own, we certainly go to as many sources as we can, scientifically or otherwise. We just had a story this past weekend about new therapies in mental health, and obviously we interviewed a lot of different reliable scientific sources in reporting that story.
Okay, I have another question, and can somebody help me, because they handed this to me, and I used to work with physicians, but I can't read this. Okay, who handed this one to me? About the PBS?
It's it from a distance. I was doing this week.
Okay.
PBS, it's the same question as NPR. What's your feeling about PBS?
Oh, yes.
It showed a little lower than CBS.
Right.
PBS NewsHour.
Oh,
And
yeah.
a little bit more liberal.
Yeah, I think maybe it is, maybe a little bit. My association with PBS and NPR both, I think they struggle to be objective and impartial and to show a lot of points of view. I think they avoid what I might call radical or, kind of far out theories and expressions, but I think that they try to address an intelligent audience and provide reasonable questions that challenge the speakers that they might be interviewing. And I think that's an important part of interviewing. As a reporter, or as an editorial board, we interview candidates every time there's an election, and I always feel that my job is to ask them questions that make them uncomfortable, and regardless of whether they are the same party that I might be myself or not, I think they should be answering the questions that the people who are concerned about them want to know, and that's how we get a little bit more towards the middle and towards the truth. I ask difficult questions of Democrats as well as of Republicans.
Jim, we have
yes.
one final question from our online audience, and we'll wrap with that, and then I'll pass things over to Kathy from the League to close this out. I'm assuming this is specifically for scientific-based research articles, but would a newspaper like the Daily Herald, do you have a team or a list of scientists you can call to help verify facts like that? How would you go about actually confirming those kinds of data points and facts?
As I was mentioning, we go to a variety of different sources. Depending if it's a health story, we go to hospitals locally. We have doctors that we know, and we try to find the most reliable people in a different genre or whatever. We look for them when we're doing that reporting. When it's a national story or an international story, we don't have the resources really to go to Johns Hopkins and ask questions there, or to go to the CDC and ask questions. We have to rely on AP and hope and expect. And if AP isn't doing it, we certainly let them know that they need to be talking to the CDC and to various agencies to get the information that they pass along. A question?
To what extent can I rely on BBC News
Oh.
and Yahoo News for objective information, like without any bias? To what extent can I rely on?
I would look to the media bias chart for a more accurate expectation than what I can give. My personal belief is that, and I've been listening to the BBC's fairly often through NPR, PBS, and my sense is that they're very much like those organizations. They strive to be objective. I think they may tilt a little bit more towards a more liberal point of view, but I think that they are always cognizant of that and cognizant of a need to find truth and of asking difficult questions of people, whether they're liberal or conservative. It was BBC and what was the other?
Yahoo.
Oh, Yahoo. I'm not that familiar with Yahoo myself, so I can't really say. It's not an agency that I've followed a lot.
All right. I think we're going to need to wrap
Okay.
up. Jim, thank you
No,
so
thank
much.
you.
I will clap my hands.
Thank
my
you.
hands are-
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now you're going to tell me if I'm live here, okay? Okay, good. So we thank you for being here.
it's my
Great
pleasure.
subject and some really good resources. So I know I appreciate the handout with all of the different charts and links on it. So I'll be using it. So thank you so
good.
much for
Oh,
being
sure.
here.
Thank you.
I was just going to take a moment to mention, Chris had mentioned we're rounding home on the 2025 meetings. We do have a meeting on the state of education. We've got a great panel coming at the end of October. So if you're able to, please join us for that. It's on October 28th. We've got 2 school board presidents. We've got the provost and the VP of External Affairs from Harper going to be here, and Anna Klimkowitz is going to be moderating a panel. So we're really excited about that, so I hope you can make it to that. And then just to get you ready for Thanksgiving, we're having a representative from Braver Angels come to talk about difficult conversations. So in case you have any relatives that you might not agree with, join us for a fun conversation about how to deal with those folks at the Thanksgiving dinner table. And one more that I'm going to mention, this goes into 2026, but we had a great turnout last year, was Paul Lesnick. He is on schedule, coming back January 27th. It's already live on the Schaumburg Library website, so go ahead and reserve your spot for that as well. And thank you very much.